Basis of emotions. Introduction. We all experience emotions. We become happy when something pleasant happens. We become sad when we lose something important. We may become angry when somebody treats us unfairly. We may become frightened when we believe that we are in danger. But although emotions are such a familiar part of our lives, we may not have thought very deeply about how an emotion actually begins. Why do we suddenly become angry? Why does fear sometimes arise before we have even understood what is happening? Why does our heart beat faster when we are frightened? And why, when we are strongly emotional, do we sometimes make decisions that we later regret? In this talk, I would like to examine the basis of emotions. The purpose is not to say that emotions are necessarily good or bad. Rather, it is to understand what happens when an emotion arises, how it affects the body and the mind, and how emotion and thought can influence each other. Once we understand this process, we can begin to observe our emotional reactions more clearly. How are emotions triggered? Let us begin with the question. What triggers an emotion? Emotions can be triggered by internal clues that are stored in our memory, or by external clues coming from our environment. Let us take a simple example. Suppose somebody says something to us that reminds us of an unpleasant experience from the past. The original experience may have happened many years ago, yet the memory of that experience can still influence our emotional reaction in the present. So, the present event may not be the whole story. Our present experience can interact with memories that have already been stored in the mind. Emotions can also be triggered by something happening around us. Imagine that you are walking along a road at night and suddenly hear a loud noise behind you. Before you have time to investigate what caused the noise, you may experience fear. The sound from the environment has acted as an external clue. This illustrates an important point. An emotion can arise before we have fully understood the situation that produced it. The nature of emotion can be reflected in the face. The nature of an emotion is often reflected in the face. When a person is happy, frightened, angry, or surprised, we can often recognize something of that emotion simply by looking at the person's face. Sometimes we deliberately try to hide what we are feeling, but even then, our facial expression may reveal something about our emotional state. This is important because emotions do not remain completely inside us. They can become visible to the people around us and can therefore influence our relationships and interactions. Emotions affect the body. Emotions also affect the functioning of the body. They can influence things such as heart rate and breathing, and strong emotions can also cause sweating. Think of what happens when you suddenly become frightened. Your heart may begin to beat faster. Your breathing may change. Your body may become tense. You may even begin to sweat. These are not imaginary experiences. Strong emotional or stress responses can produce measurable physical changes. The American Psychological Association, for example, describes increased heart rate, sweating, and changes in breathing among common physiological responses to stress. Consider another familiar example. Suppose you are about to speak before a large audience. Even though you know that there is no physical danger, you may feel your heart beating faster or your hands becoming sweaty. The body is responding to what the mind perceives as a challenging situation. So emotion is not something that exists separately from the body. Emotion and bodily changes are closely connected. Strong emotions can modify what we receive through our senses. There is another important effect of strong emotions. When an emotion becomes strong, it can modify the inputs we receive through our sense organs, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. In other words, the way we experience what is happening around us can be influenced by our emotional state. Imagine two people hearing exactly the same words. One person is calm, the other person is already angry. The calm person may hear the words without much difficulty. The angry person may interpret exactly the same words as an insult or an attack. The words have not necessarily changed, but the emotional state of the listener has changed the way the situation is experienced. This is one reason why the same event can produce very different emotional reactions in different people. Strong emotions interfere with rational thinking. Now we come to one of the most important points in the chapter. Rational thinking and judgment can be interfered with during a strong emotion. When we are strongly angry, frightened, or distressed, our normal ability to think calmly may temporarily be affected. We may speak without thinking.